We believe our feelings are our own, fleeting phantoms of the mind, unique to our experience. But what if emotion could be distilled? What if sorrow, rage, even joy could be extracted, catalogued, and stored away like rare artifacts in a silent museum? Tonight, on Twilight Terrors, we unseal the forgotten case files of the Somatic Archive, a place built to contain the uncontainable and the terrifying price paid by those who curated our deepest heartbreaks. Elara Vance's first breath inside the Somatic Archive tasted of chilled, recycled air and something else. An undercurrent so faint she almost dismissed it, like the metallic tang of distant ozone, or perhaps the ghost of unshed tears. The elevator descended for what felt like an eternity, a silent plummet into the earth's cold embrace. When the doors finally hissed open, they revealed not a bustling research facility, but a cathedral of concrete and quiet dread. Dr. Alastair Finch, the archive's director, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, greeted her with a sterile handshake. "Welcome, Miss Vance," he'd said, his voice as dry as the filtered air. "Your unique expertise in neuro-emotive resonance makes you an invaluable addition to our delicate work." Delicate work. That's what they called it. Elara, armed with a doctorate and a naive belief in the project's potential to alleviate global trauma, had envisioned something groundbreaking. The archive's mission, as outlined in the heavily redacted briefing documents, was to isolate, study, and preserve significant emotional imprints. In layman's terms, they bottled feelings. Her new mentor, Silas Blackwood, a man who looked as though he'd been excavated rather than employed, explained the process with weary precision. "We don't bottle them, Elara," he corrected, his voice a gravelly whisper that seemed absorbed by the sound-dampening walls. "We facilitate a sympathetic transference. The donor relives the peak experience. Our equipment captures the neurolimbic cascade, the full somatic echo. It's then coalesced." He gestured towards a reinforced door marked Vault 7, Grief, Acute and Prolonged. Her first sight of a core was in the hushed, refrigerated expanse of Vault 7. Suspended in individual containment cradles, bathed in soft blue light, were dozens of translucent spheres, each roughly the size of a human heart. They pulsed with a slow internal luminescence, some a bruised indigo, others a pale watery gray. This was grief, solidified, tangible. Elara felt an involuntary shiver, a coolness that had nothing to do with the vault's temperature. "They're beautiful," she breathed, the word feeling inadequate, almost profane. Silas's lips thinned. "They are potent, Miss Vance. Respect their weight." The initial weeks were a blur of protocols, calibrations, and the meticulous cataloging of new acquisitions. Elara learned the language of the archive: bleed effect, resonance dampening, emotional integrity fields. The bleed effect was subtle at first. Walking past the crimson-lit Vault 3, rage unconsolidated, she'd feel a prickle of irrational anger, a tightening in her jaw. Near Vault 9, joy transcendent, a fleeting, inexplicable lightness. Most staff, herself included, wore discreet personal dampeners, small devices clipped to their lapels, designed to mitigate these ambient emotional tides. But Silas rarely wore his. "You need to feel the currents, child," he'd rasped, his eyes, like old clouded glass, holding a depth of sorrow that seemed to predate the archive itself. "Or they'll drag you under when you least expect it." The archive hummed with a life of its own. The constant, low thrum of the climate control, the rhythmic sigh of pneumatic doors, the soft whirring from within the core cradles. But beneath it, Elara began to sense another rhythm, the collective sigh of contained sorrow, the silent scream of trapped fury, the nervous tremor of fear. The air in the deeper levels, especially near the vaults holding older, more concentrated cores, felt thick, almost viscous. She found herself taking shallower breaths. Her unease coalesced around Core 81B, designated the Mariupol Lament. It had been acquired recently, sourced from a field medic who'd witnessed an atrocity that defied words. Unlike the others, its light was a fractured, unstable obsidian, shot through with flickers of raw white agony. It pulsed erratically, and the air around its cradle was perceptibly colder. Even through her dampener, Elara felt a profound, crushing despair emanate from it, a wave of grief so absolute it stole her breath and brought the sting of tears to her eyes. "That one, it's strong," she remarked to Silas during a routine diagnostic. Silas paused, his gaze lingering on 81B. "All grief is strong, Elara. But some sorrows have teeth." He tapped a sensor on its cradle. "Its resonance signature is atypical, higher amplitude bleed than its mass would suggest. Finch is concerned." Concerned was an understatement. Over the next few weeks, Core 81B became the archive's festering wound. Staff members working in its vicinity reported migraines, sudden bouts of uncontrollable weeping, and vivid, intrusive nightmares that weren't their own. One technician, a stoic man named Harris, was found catatonic in the corridor outside Vault 7, his face a mask of frozen terror, muttering about the burning sky and children's shoes. He was sedated and transferred topside. The official report cited acute psychological breakdown due to occupational stress. Elara's personal dampener felt increasingly ineffective. The edges of her own emotions began to blur. Was this sadness hers, or a whisper from Vault 7? Was this sudden surge of anxiety her own worry, or a ripple from the fear existential cores in Vault 4? She started having dreams, not nightmares, but vivid, hyper-realistic fragments of other lives. A flash of a joyful wedding in a sun-drenched Italian village. The bone-chilling fear of hiding in a dark cellar as boots thudded overhead. The searing rage of betrayal. These weren't her memories. She found herself drawn to Core 81B, despite the oppressive aura it radiated. In its fractured, obsidian depths, she thought she saw shapes, fleeting images like reflections in a dark pool, the silhouette of a ruined building, a small abandoned toy, a hand reaching out. "It's trying to show me something," she confided in Silas, her voice hushed. Silas looked older than ever, his skin like parchment stretched over bone. Cores don't try, Elara. They resonate. They echo. This one is screaming, and the others are starting to listen. He was right. The archive itself seemed to be growing unwell. Lights flickered in unoccupied corridors. The gentle hum of the machinery occasionally skipped like a faltering heartbeat. Doors would jam or hiss open unexpectedly. The bleed effect was no longer subtle. It was a palpable pressure, a cacophony of silent emotional shouts pressing in from all sides. Even Finch's carefully constructed composure seemed to be cracking. His smiles were rarer, his eyes darted nervously. One evening, Elara was working late, trying to recalibrate the dampening field around Core 81B. The vault was cold, the silence absolute, save for the core's erratic throb. Suddenly, a wave of despair hit her with physical force, buckling her knees. She gasped, clutching her chest, as an image, sharp and brutal, seared itself into her mind. A bombed-out hospital, the smell of dust and blood, the wail of a mother clutching a small, still form. It wasn't just an image, it was feeling. The mother's grief, raw and boundless, poured into Elara, threatening to drown her. She stumbled back, tears streaming down her face, her own identity momentarily submerged. "Silas!" She choked into her calm, but only static answered. She fled Vault 7, the echoes of that unbearable sorrow clinging to her. The main concourse was eerily dim, the emergency lights casting long, dancing shadows. She saw movement near Vault 3, rage. Two junior curators, their faces contorted in snarls, were physically fighting, grunts and impacts echoing in the sudden silence. Their personal dampeners lay discarded on the floor. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of borrowed grief. This was a cascade. Core 81B's potent distress was resonating through the archive, amplifying and being amplified by the other cores. The carefully maintained emotional ecosystem was collapsing. She found Silas in the central control nexus. He was slumped over a console, his breath shallow, his skin clammy. His eyes, usually so guarded, were wide with a naked, childlike terror. "Silas, what's happening?" Elara cried, shaking his shoulder. He focused on her with difficulty. The harmony protocol. Finch, he tried. Too late," he wheezed. The harmony protocol was the archive's doomsday switch, a massive energy surge designed to neutralize all core activity, effectively wiping them. But it required precise calibration, a delicate balance. He overloaded the primary conduit for Vault 7, tried to isolate 81B, but it fed on it. A low, guttural groan echoed from the speakers, the sound of the archive's deep system straining. The lights flickered violently, then plunged the nexus into near darkness, lit only by the frantic red glow of warning indicators. "It's awake, Elara," Silas whispered, a tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "The collective, the pain, it's become sentient." A klaxon began to blare, a panicked, pulsing shriek. On the main schematic display, core after core flared from stable blue to unstable crimson. Vault 7 was a blinding supernova of black and red light. The very walls of the archive seemed to hum with a terrible, resonant power. Elara felt it, a tsunami of pure, undiluted human suffering. A billion tiny needles of grief, rage, and fear pricking at her consciousness, trying to tear it apart.
"We have to get out," she yelled, pulling Silas to his feet. But he was a dead weight, his eyes rolling back. "No escape from this," he mumbled. "It wants to share." The reinforced door to the nexus buckled inwards with a screech of tortured metal. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the hellish red light of the corridor, was Dr. Finch, or what had been Dr. Finch. His body was rigid, his movements jerky, his eyes vacant, reflecting the crimson glare. A low, multi-toned keen emanated from his throat. Not one voice, but many, a chorus of anguish. "Join the chorus," the Finch thing rasped, its voice a distorted blend of sorrow and fury. It took a shuffling step forward. Elara's mind raced. The primary lift was surely compromised. Maintenance shafts, too slow. Then she remembered. The old incineration chamber. Decommissioned years ago, but still accessible through a sub-level duct. It had an emergency surface vent. It was a desperate chance. She dragged Silas, her own mind reeling under the psychic assault. Every shadow seemed to writhe with other people's pain. She heard screams that weren't there, felt phantom hands clutching at her. Her own memories, her own sense of self, felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. The Finch thing pursued, its steps heavy, its terrible keen growing louder. Other figures, other staff members, their faces blank or contorted with stolen emotions, began to emerge from the darkened corridors, drawn by the cascade. They moved with a shared, unnatural purpose. Reaching the sub-level access, Elara wrestled with the rusted hatch. The air here was thick with the smell of decay, and something else. A cloying sweetness, like overripe fruit, that she instinctively knew was the smell of concentrated, decaying joy from a nearby forgotten vault. The emotional bleed was now a suffocating blanket. With a final desperate heave, the hatch creaked open. She pushed Silas through, then scrambled after him, slamming it shut just as the Finch thing's hand reached the opening.
The duct was narrow, dark, and filled with the roar of the failing facility. The very concrete vibrated around her. She could feel the archive dying, or perhaps being reborn as something monstrous. She crawled, dragging Silas, the screams of the collective agony trying to claw their way into her sanity. "This is not my pain," she chanted internally, a desperate mantra. "This is not my sorrow." Light ahead, a rusted ladder leading up to a circular vent cover. With her last reserves of strength, she pushed Silas up, then followed, her muscles screaming, her mind a raw, exposed nerve. She kicked at the vent cover. It groaned, resisted, then gave way with a shower of rust and dirt. Cool night air, smelling of pine and damp earth, washed over her. Freedom. She hauled Silas out onto the rough ground, then collapsed, gasping, as the sounds of the dying archive, a final earth-shattering groan, then a profound, terrible silence, echoed up from the vent. They were found at dawn by a bewildered forest ranger, miles from any known structure, covered in grime. Elara conscious but incoherent, Silas in a coma from which he would never wake. The official story was a localized seismic event that had swallowed a geological survey outpost. No mention was ever made of the Somatic Archive or its terrible cargo. It was erased. Elara recovered physically, but the archive had left its scars deep within her. Her personal dampener was gone, destroyed in the escape, and she found she no longer needed one, or rather,
it wouldn't have mattered. The experience had stripped away her internal filters. She felt everything now. The subtle currents of emotion that flowed between people in a crowded room were to her a deafening roar. A stranger's fleeting sadness on a bus could bring her to tears. A news report of distant suffering felt like a physical blow. The world, once a place of manageable feelings, was now an overwhelming, unbearable symphony of raw emotion. She lived in perpetual sensory overload, haunted by the echoes of those stolen sorrows, the weight of a world's pain that she had brushed against and could no longer ignore. The archive was gone, buried deep beneath the earth. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world outside was quiet, Elara would feel a faint tremor in the ground, a distant, psychic hum, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the emotions were still down there, waiting, resonating, a silent, collective heart, still beating in the dark, a library of lost feelings yearning for release. And she wondered if anything, truly, could ever be contained.